Operation Epic Fury is over.
According to, just reading it now, according to Reuters, citing an Israeli source, Israel was not aware that Trump was nearing a possible agreement with Iran to end the war and reopen shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. It continues to seem that Trump is making moves without even informing Israel. It seems I'm still in the belief that he's pissed off at the intelligence.
He has to be pissed off at Israel for the bad intelligence and tricking him into this war. So he can't say it publicly because he can't admit he's still portraying this as victory to the American people. And by the way, I've read that like 74% of Trump supporters think we've won the war. That's insane. We'll get into that later. But since he's pretending to have won, how can he be mad at Israel publicly over a war he's won? That makes no sense, right? Why would Israel got us into this war and then we won so bigly and so convincingly? What's there to be mad about? Behind the scenes, I think he's probably a little ticked at Israel.
That was given to him that dragged him into this war. I hope it's the case because that would lead to some change in U.S. foreign policy potentially. But that's my feeling. An Israeli source to the Israeli Army radio also said we were unaware of the American intention to end the operation, Project Freedom in the Strait of Hormuz. We prepared for escalation. Of course you did, guys. But I remember when I was covering it, you get
Israel preparing for escalation? I could have never have predicted that. What a shock.
the news out of Israel. We did it live as well. You get news out of Israel saying we're preparing for an escalation, preparing for war, prepare the shelters. And then Trump puts out a post, doesn't even mention the UAE, mentions just South Korea, the vessel there. And then when asked about the UAE, he's like, oh, it's only a few missiles. Most were intercepted, one landed with limited damage. And you got Fujairah burning, which indicates, in my view, it indicates that either Trump is bluffing or what's more likely, in my view, is he just does not want to escalate. He doesn't want to get back into that quagmire he was in.
Yeah, I mean, I have no doubts that he doesn't want to get into it because I'm sure
he's not out of the quagmire yet. Strait of Hormuz is still closed for the moment.
That he is well aware of the financial costs. I mean, businessman is, his one thing he's actually really good and knowledgeable about. And it does not take a MBA to be able to see that we are in a bad situation financially, economically, agriculturally, everything else you want to mention already. I mean, so many things are baked in there. And every expert that I've talked to, both financial, the guys who have to do with food security, the oil industry, you name it, everybody says the longer this thing goes, the greater the long-term damage is going to be to the economic industry and to just to be able to have food and be able to produce it. Already baked in, there's lots of problems here. But if we go back,
yes, I've been saying the same thing. There's a lot of economic pain in the pipelines, and it's going to hit over the summer, the first wave of it, and that's high gas prices. The high food prices, that's next year. Look forward to that too.
Back to hot war, then and physical infrastructure is damaged throughout the Gulf, both in Iran and in the GCC countries. I mean, it's lights out. I mean, it's almost like you're gonna have a global depression that's going to last some number of years. Once the thing even finally comes to an end,
it's gonna be stagflation, the worst bout of stagflation since the 1970s.
Even after that, and I think Trump is hopefully spooked by that. He certainly should be. And now he's looking for any kind of an exit. And this odd thing about talking about the Project Freedom being over after like 36 hours of being effective when it had almost no impact whatsoever. And then this morning saying with Axios, we're like 48 hours away. And if Iran agrees to everything, it'll be great. Iran is coming out and saying, yeah, what are you talking about? We haven't agreed to anything. We haven't even met face to face here. We're still.
Exactly. Trump announcing 48 hours away from a deal, and both sides haven't even met to start discussing. For reference, it took Obama administration 6 months to work out the nuclear deal with Iran, and we haven't begun serious talks yet. What I think Trump means when he says we're 48 hours away from a deal is a deal to start negotiations, like a deal maybe to partly open the straits while negotiations take place. That's maybe what I think might be in the works. And it's going to be, that is what might happen. If that's the case, then good on Trump because he might get the Strait of Hormuz open and oil flowing. And if I was Iran, I wouldn't actually do that because, or I'd do it very limitedly because leverage comes from the Strait of Hormuz. And honestly, I will say it's a win for Trump if he comes to some sort of arrangement that gets oil flowing through the straits, because Iran will have given up its biggest leverage, economic leverage, if that happens. So we'll have to wait and see. I'm sure there's some parts of Iran that don't want to do that, don't want to open the straits until a final deal is done. And that would be how I'd approach it personally. We'll have to wait and see.
Still trying to figure out what the U.S. sent, and who knows what that was. But one of their, let's see, what was he? I think he was the foreign ministry. Let's see, the text of the National Security Commission. Axios text is wishful thinking rather than reality. What they failed to obtain face-to-face negotiations, they will not obtain through a lost war. Iran has its finger on the trigger. If they do not surrender and offer the necessary concessions, or if they will try any mischief, we will offer a harsh response. So, it doesn't sound like it's wired too tight with the Iranian side, whatever it is Trump is thinking about here. Obviously, it wasn't with Israel, and I wager that it wasn't with many people in the United States either. So I don't have a lot of hope for this, but I do hope that President Trump recognizes the
I don't have hope either. Remember, this coming in the context of Trump making announcements like this for weeks on end. The war is about to be over. The war is won. We have a deal. We have a ceasefire. Oh. Well, I believe this latest one.
real risk that he goes down if we give in to what the Israelis want to do and return to the war. The cost to us could be just catastrophic.
Who made that statement?
$300 oil. If the Gulf goes up in flames, you're heading for $300 oil. Because what we have right now, all of the 2 months missing, that is still stuff that can be replaced essentially by the world's oil reserves. And so it'll never reach the point where those reserves just run out. But if the Gulf oil infrastructure is destroyed, the world will run out of oil reserves, and then there still won't be any new production. And then, oh my God, $300 oil. It's catastrophic. And it stays up there for 2 or 3 years. I mean, 2 years, some production will come online, and it might fall. But we'll have at least a year of $300 oil. It'll be devastating to the world economy if the Gulf goes up in flames. Like Great Depression with inflation type scenario.
On the Iranian side, was it the foreign ministry?
Yeah, it says the national. It was on the ISNA Farsi service on X, and it's attributed to the National Security Commission spokesman.
Okay, we're gonna get that. But first, it's fascinating, Colonel, is that in the U.S., 77% of Americans think the war is over. Think that the U.S. is winning the war and won the war. Now,
yes, that is so insane.
This is first for people like me. Yeah, I was surprised when I saw that. 77%, according to a Harvard poll. Now,
well, a good time to have zero cash in the bank and buy all things you need as soon as you have cash. Yeah, it's if there was a way to stock up on gas ahead of time, that now would be a good time to use it. If you have empty huge oil storage tank, fill that up now. Most of us can't do that, unfortunately.
Now, I find it to be a good piece of news because it shows that Trump can walk away and call it a win, and the majority of Americans would believe him that this was a win. So that's the positive aspect of it. Obviously, the delusion in the US just shows how skewed they are from reality, and that applies to pretty much every country. I thought it would apply less in the US with the freedom of the press, but people seem to be too busy to do a deep dive into this. But it's also pretty crazy to imagine what just happened in the last 2 days. The war, there were negotiations were ongoing, etc. The US decided to test, pushing the boundaries, prodding Iran with Project Freedom. They escorted 2 ships allegedly. I think one was confirmed. I'm not sure about the other one. They escorted 2 ships. Iran went.
They claimed 2 ships. One, I think, was confirmed.
Gloves off, struck various vessels, made a lot of threats, attacked one of the U.S. vessels as well. Apparently, it was a bigger attack than just 2 missiles, and then struck the Fujairah oil refinery in the UAE. And by the way, yesterday they struck the UAE again, one wave of attacks. And apparently this morning they attacked a vessel with a cruise missile off the coast of the UAE as well. So Iran made it very clear that they're not budging. And then Trump walked back his decision to try to see if he can escort.
Apparently the route that U.S. was guiding ships on was just absolutely hugging the coast here. Because they figured out there weren't any mines on this particular coast, and so they had 2 ships go through that. And it's the furthest point, like 31 miles from Iran. And I think the only reason they were able to do that is because it was ceasefire period, and Iran wasn't being hyper vigilant during this operation. And they just went apeshit after they heard this was happening. They attacked UAE has this pipeline that goes up to here. See the border, Oman. This is Oman. This is Oman. This is UAE. They have a very weird map in this place, the part of the world. But UAE has pipelines that go up to ports right here. And in response to what the United States did, Iran said, okay, new embargo all the way to here. Ships aren't allowed to leave from this place with oil from the United Emirates, gotten from the port here. You see Fujairah right here. I must say the map names on Google Earth aren't great, but right here says Fujairah, and that is the port that was hit multiple times by Iran this week, and where they have a pipeline going, and they were still exporting oil, avoiding the Straits of Hormuz. Well, Iran's just attacked the oil infrastructure here and enforced now this is part of the Strait of Hormuz, it claims. Any ships leaving from here with oil will be attacked. So it's Operation Project Freedom backfired in a big way. They also expanded. You see right down here, all these ships gathered. That is the port where they were still exporting oil from, because there's a pipeline going to it. They hit that 2 times with multiple missiles and probably damaged, put it out of operation for a while. And they also expanded their area of control so that it includes this port. They're not going to let oil go from this port. That means instead of having 12 million barrels missing, you now have an additional 4 million barrels missing from this port. So we're up to 16 million barrels missing per day now. They also expanded the zone of control further this way, here. And so now their blockade of Strait of Hormuz is now more intense than it was before. We can actually check what's going on with ships there at the moment. That's always interesting. See, now this is part of their blockade. Ships might be targeted if you're here. And so you see there is now a space. You see this space over here and ships here is because now Iran has enforced a blockade, and this space is because of that blockade, and these ships are under threat. And if you've been looking at this map at any time in the last few weeks, you know that there used to be a whole bunch of ships right here and a whole bunch of ships here. Here was when there was an open space, but now, because of what Iran's done, there's just ships have just moved further back, and there's a big space here, and these ships are in limbo. It's not great.
Ships through the Strait of Hormuz. It's pretty extraordinary seeing this unfold in front of our eyes, how politics works and how things happen during warfare. It's pretty crazy to see that unfold.
Well, it is. And then when you add to all the things you just mentioned there, I think it was also officially, yes.
Well, this war is complicated in ways that other wars aren't. There's so many players. There's Iran, United States, there's Israel, there's the Gulf states, there's Russia and China. And even to a small extent, there's like all the other states that are dependent on Strait of Hormuz, like Japan, South Korea, that now have an interest in this. This is a war. It's not just a few parties. Like Ukraine and Russia is simple by comparison. Just there's Europe, there's United States, NATO basically backing Ukraine, and then there's Russia, and that's. But this Iran war, far more players and far more stakes in terms of global energy trade.
Yesterday, to include with the nice new little logo, Straits Transit Authority, I think that's the name of it, that the Iranians had declared. And they said, yeah, this is the new permanent deal. We're now moving in control of this. Any kind of negotiation with the U.S. won't even start until it recognizes our position here. We're never giving that up, ever. And, and you see they are very stalwart, and they say, yeah, you want to bring the bombs back on? We can do that. We'll issue our own here, but we are never giving this straight up here. So I guess that maybe Trump recognizes that too, that he knows from talking to our military people that we cannot force them out of that position. That we just don't have the military capacity because they have too many ways that they can keep it under control. And they demonstrate some of it by attacking some of these ships to make sure that these civilian carriers know what's true, what we are protecting, and what they can reach out when they feel like it and hit are two very different things. And the only one that matters is the reality on the sea, and that's the one that's going to carry the day.
Yep.
What a disaster for all American allies in the region, especially Gulf nations. What a disastrous outcome. This is the announcement by Iran. Iran's newly created Persian Gulf Strait. They've even renamed it. Authority they have an authority. Persian Gulf Strait Authority has reportedly emailed shipping companies with stranded vessels in the Gulf, laying out the instructions for passing through the Strait of Hormuz. 1, payment of tolls in Iranian rials. That's important, obviously, because their currency is collapsing. That's number 1. Number 2, guarantees issued within the Iranian banking system. So they're trying to prop up their economy. 3, countries that caused or contributed to damages during the war must pay reparations before obtaining a permit.
It's funny, but it's I would be doing that too if I was Iran. These are the starting points for negotiations. So you want to put your maximalist demands on the table, especially if you're in a strong position.
That sanctioned Iran or blocked its assets abroad are banned entirely. So any country that is sanctioning Iran right now, which includes a lot of Asian countries, pretty much the entire world, because they all abide by U.S. sanctions. So I'm assuming this applies to all countries that abide by American sanctions, unless they only apply it to the country that has issued the sanctions, which is the U.S.
Iran is talking to China, and China has just said it won't respect U.S. sanctions anymore. I think it's coordinated push to get rid of U.S. sanctions by both China, Russia, and Iran.
But countries that have contributed to the war or to the damages of the war now have to pay reparations. So they've just dragged the rest of the Gulf into this. They're asking the Gulf to pay Iran as well. 4, all documents must use the name Persian.
Oh my God, the Gulf states would hate that. But charging a toll would be the way to get that reparations. That would be more palatable. Not direct payments. We'll see.
Gulf. 5, non-compliance results in vessel seizure and a fine of 20% of cargo value. 6, all vessels must follow designated corridors and comply with Iranian armed forces instructions. And 7, Israeli flagged vessels and any ship going to or from Israeli ports are banned. Welcome to 2026, Kevin.
Would you have thought we would be here a few months ago before this war? The decision to bomb Iran's supreme leader was one of the biggest strategic blunders ever, not only on the part of U.S. president, but of any world leader.
2026.
Yeah, and that's the language of the defeated. That's what the vanquished.
Yes, I mean, the language of the vanquished.
Listen, this is put
this in context of 74% of Americans believing we've won this war.
The United States in a position we have.
No. I was thinking of it this way. Let's say Asmongold had been elected instead of Trump. I think he would have gone into this war too. Remember how he was gung-ho? I think I've been listening to commentators speak at how unusual this is in terms of negotiations. Normally you have, it happens like on the lower level people meet, they hash out the details, it gets brought up, makes its way up, president looks it over, sends it back down saying this is not okay or this is okay, and that's how negotiations work. But way we're doing negotiations now, it's basically Trump is doing it through his tweets, through his son-in-law, through these outsiders. He's completely bypassing the State Department nearly in all these negotiations. And he's doing that because he doesn't trust the State Department, the deep state, because there's so many people that worked against him in the past at the State Department. And so he doesn't trust them to do negotiations for him. And it's so it's Asmongold's foreign policy. It's good in that it avoids the deep state. It avoids the State Department and the amount of control the deep state will be able to exert if Trump was relying on the State Department. It's bad in that the State Department does have some legitimate uses. It would have been able to warn him about the closure of Strait of Hormuz, and it does have some real insight there. Yes, it's controlled by the deep state and by interests that are against America, but at the same time, there are good people working there that it does serve its purpose. So if you stop relying on that, then the problem is you're vulnerable because there's been decades of propaganda about Iran being evil, decades of propaganda about how great the U.S. military is. And if you have people like Asmongold who are victims to those two propagandas about how evil Iran is and how we could never lose a war, well, if Iran is so evil and we can never lose a war, why not bomb Iran's supreme leader? That is how we got into this war. Yeah, people, Haig says, people he brought in that aren't beholden to deep state or State Department, and they just have been told their whole lives that America is invincible and Iran is evil. And explain to me, if those two things are true, why shouldn't we bomb Iran's supreme leader? I mean, it's not like we could lose the war. What could Iran do? And that's why we bombed the Iran supreme leader. And that's why the Trump administration was vulnerable to being tricked by Netanyahu, because it had cut itself off from the State Department, from yes, the deep state controls Department of Defense. I'm going to call it that just because I'd rather than Department of War. The Defense Department and State Department. But at the same time, the State Department and the Department of Defense, there are people there that serve those purposes, that do analysis and would be able to tell, okay, if we attack Iran, Strait of Hormuz is closed, we're completely screwed. Well, people that knew that for certain in State Department and Department of Defense, were sidelined by the Trump administration. And you had people with Asmongold level understanding basically running U.S. foreign policy. And so Netanyahu tricked Trump into this war. That is my understanding. I've called it the Asmongold War. I still believe that's true. I still believe that's how he got into it. Because, you cut yourself off from Defense Department and the State Department, where they'd be able to warn and against the worst outcomes and the worst scenarios. This is what you get.
Have not been in, I don't know, maybe you can go back to the early part of the Korean War when we had been driven out of Seoul and was driven out down to, the famous Pusan perimeter, almost driven off the peninsula. You may have to go that far, or maybe the Chosun River, Chosun Valley battle that we lost to the Chinese. That's probably how far you have to go back until we were put into a position where someone else compelled us to comply with something that they wanted to do, and we couldn't just force our way in. I mean, even throughout the Vietnam Wars, it was a strategic loss, but we never lost on a tactical battlefield. But here, this is as close to a loss on a tactical battlefield as you can get, and a strategic loss. And we don't know how to deal with someone telling us what the terms are going to be. And you see, Trump is just...
It's basically, it's those decades of propaganda about how powerful the U.S. military is, being confronted by reality in that U.S. can lose if you fuck around. If you start a war from a very poor position, which Trump did. He started this war without a plan for the closure of Strait of Hormuz. That's the problem. It wasn't United States military fighting at its strongest. It was United States fighting at its weakest, because we weren't ready for all the missiles they sent at us. We didn't have the defense. We weren't ready for the closure of Strait of Hormuz. And that's why the blockade Trump put in place, that happened like a month and a half after the war started. If you were prepared, that should have happened day one. So it's, yes, the United States lost this war in Iran, but I will say in its defense that it lost because this was a war started from a position of weakness. One, no preparations in terms of military for what was going to happen. And two, no preparation on the domestic side either. Trump got Congress to authorize the war in Iraq. He went that length. That Trump didn't do that. That makes one vulnerability, one place where he can be impeached. Bush prepared the American people, and he lied during that preparation. That was part of the preparation, but he prepared and convinced American people that we should attack Iraq by saying weapons of mass destruction. Trump didn't even bother with that. It was a complete war of choice, and we didn't drum up support for it beforehand. And if you have no public support, you have no ability to take casualties. And that's starting a war where you can't take casualties. That's starting a war from a position of absolute weakness. And yeah, so no military preparations, no preparations to potentially take casualties by preparing the American people for that. Yeah, there was no way we could win this with Iran.
Scrambling with that Truth Social last night, the other one, the first thing this morning, just completely divorced from reality, scrambling to try to find some way to put a good face on this. And I agree with you, unfortunately, is that this shocking 70% people think that we're winning the war is only because the propaganda that succeeds on the mainstream media in the United States, which propagates that from the administration and their friendly folks that keep saying that stuff. So that's bad. But if that gives him cover to not exacerbate this loss and do something stupid like turn it back into a hot war, because, and I know, guarantee there are people in his ear that are screaming for him to do that. Oh, Mr. President, you can't do this. You can't do this weakness. We'll never live this down. It'll cause, fill in all the blank of the things they'll argue. We have to go back. We can do this. They're bluffing. They don't have the power to do it. You know, you can see that happening. So the question is Trump going to give in to that? And he's going to give in to those same people. And I promise you, this is happening behind the scenes. They'll say, Mr. President, you'll be seen as one of the weakest presidents in American history if you submit to.
Yes, that's a problem. And Trump's ego can't take it. And it's not only his ego, his political career can't take it either. 74% of Americans believe we've won this war in Iran. But take another fact. Let's look into it. How popular is the war? Generally, about 28 to 40% of Americans support the war. Now, I go on the lower end because now it's on the lower end. 28% of people support the war in Iran, and 74% of people think we've won. What do you think the support for the war in Iran will happen to that once people realize that we've lost? How many people do you think will support it then? That support for the war will collapse once people realize we actually lost.
Iran to little Iran, and we go in there and we bomb, and then we walk away, tail between our legs. Everybody's going to know. You'll be embarrassed. We won't be able to do business anywhere. It'll go bad. They'll say that, and he can go, oh shoot. You know, he thrives on being the victor and the king, and you know, the guy that's in charge and the one that everybody loves and lavishes praise on. And he can't. I
honestly, I remember thinking last year, and some things Trump has done, like going after Greenland and the way he's behaved, is that he doesn't understand the law of leverage of powers that in the international system, like NATO, the way he rails against NATO. NATO is the way the United States extracts wealth from Europe. All these Europeans buy these hugely, insanely overpriced weapons from the United States. And our NATO is the way we make them do that. It's in our benefit. It's 100% in our benefit, NATO. And so then for Trump to say things like European countries aren't doing enough, it's completely missing that. So I remember thinking when I was seeing Trump doing all this last year, he really is, like Asmongold in level of understanding of international relationships. He thinks the United States is a lot more powerful than it actually is. He thinks that the public, what the media tells us, that NATO is entirely we are protecting Europe. Europe owes us because of NATO. And the reality is we've extracted huge amounts of wealth from Europe via weapon sales and other means through NATO. But what the media tells us is the same thing Trump does, is that Europe benefited from NATO. Because the media doesn't spell out the stuff behind the scenes, like the fact that Gulf nations sell their oil in dollars and then are forced to put the majority of that into U.S. treasuries and U.S. stocks, and they can never sell it. And it's basically, we've just appropriated a huge chunk of their oil revenue that we basically own. The media doesn't portray it that way. Trump's understanding of the world in terms of international relations is same as Asmongold, and it's formed by the media. And that is completely has no understanding of the underlying realities. And seeing Trump behave and act on this understanding, I was thinking, at some point it's going to become a big problem. He's going to do something that's not understanding how the world really works, and it happened. The war in Iran happened.
I fear that he will give in to that pressure and saying, "Oh well, I can't be seen as bad." I don't know how it's going to turn out. You see, anything's possible. With that 70%, they could kick that propaganda machine back into gear and sell it as that. So I hope they try that, because the alternative is terrible for the region, for Asia, for Europe, and certainly for the United States. So I hope we go down that path.
So he has two options. Number one, he can admit defeat and just walk away and move on and paint it into a win, knowing it's a defeat, and from a legacy perspective, it's going to look terrible. But that doesn't fit his personality, as that's the tricky part, as you're saying. The other one, he has to make it into a win, as a genuine win, something that even people that are, not the average American, the 74% of Americans that believe it's already.
Problem with that is that's exactly what Iran can't afford to happen. The way it establishes deterrence, the way it makes sure Trump doesn't come and bomb them again in 10 months, is by inflicting a loss on Trump. If Trump walks away from this with a win, like he did last year with the 12-day war, where he bombed them and declared victory and walked away, if he does that, he has every incentive to try again later. I mean, he got a win. If he gets a win out of this terrible situation, then Trump has a way to get a win out of anything. Why would he hold back? Why would he stop from bombing Iran again? If he can extract a win from them this time, he'll be able to extract a win from them next time too. And he has no incentive not to bomb them again in a year when he feels like it.
A win. And he has a path for that.
And that's why Iran has to inflict a political loss on Trump. So that he said, I don't want to have another loss. So the next president says, okay, look what happened to Trump. I'm not going to do that. Iran needs to establish deterrence.
And I know I've said this before, but if he genuinely focuses on U.S. interests, allows Iran more influence over the Strait of Hormuz, allows them to charge a fee, so the U.S. doesn't have to pay any reparations.
That is the most likely outcome of this. The United States is not going to directly pay any reparations. It might unfreeze Iranian assets, which essentially means giving them billions of dollars, and it will allow them to charge a toll, but it won't pay reparations.
A short period of time, and then starts to lift sanctions. By the way, there's reports that this is part of the deal. The reports is part of the negotiations right now. The U.S.-Iran talks, according to Axios and Reuters.
Thing is, what's funny, and I'm sure Trump's enemies will bring this up, is that Trump railed on Obama for giving, quote unquote, Iran money, because Obama unfroze some, not all, just some Iranian assets as part of his nuclear deal. Now, it looks like Trump is going to do the exact same thing to get out of this current war with Iran. How is the media going to react when he unfreezes billions and billions of Iranian assets?
Are close to a one-page deal end to the war. A drafted agreement would pause fighting, freeze Iran's nuclear enrichment under stricter inspections, ease some U.S. sanctions, and reopen the Strait of Hormuz, mediated through Pakistan. So if he does ease sanctions, that is a win for Iran, obviously, and a win for the U.S. doing business with Iran. Maybe not great for the Gulf, which I live in, but the rest of the world doesn't mind having in Iran with sanctions as long as they freeze their nuclear program. The biggest loser there is Israel. And if he does take that deal, it does work for everyone's interests but Israel.
Yes, because Israel wants a weak Iran. Its preferred outcome was for Iran to collapse and like Syria and just become a bunch of warring factions. Having Iran that has sanctions lifted, where it will be a boom for its economy. I mean, its economy will explode. And Iran is a lot bigger than Israel, and Israel can't compete. With a sanctioned Iran, its oil exports are badly crippled, and Israel has the backing of the United States, then Israel can sort of compete with Iran. But Iran that's not constrained that way, Israel doesn't have a chance against them.
And that could be a win for him, a genuine win for him, because that would show the US making a decision that at the detriment of an ally that has taken advantage of the country. And for that, I'd hand him his flowers if he manages to do this. I know he's got a lot of pressure around him, and we've seen the complete opposite in the last few months, especially with this war. But he does have that opportunity. And if you look at the indications we saw as we started this interview of Israeli sources say,
I will say, if Trump, through unfreezing of assets, lifting of sanctions and other measures, manages to convince Iran to let oil flow through the Strait of Hormuz, after only 2 months of the Strait of Hormuz being closed, I will consider that a small victory on his part. He's still probably going to get crushed by this Iran war politically. It opens him up to all types of attacks of being weak. So he's taking political damage to limit the economic damage. And that would be, I would say, good for Trump. That's probably the best case scenario for Trump, if he can pull it off, if he actually has will and I've said it, is to take the political loss now and get oil flowing would be the best thing for him to do. I still think it's ending his presidency, but it would be best thing for America.
We didn't know there's a deal that is nearing. We didn't even know that he's going to stop the Operation Freedom. So he seems to be making decisions unilaterally. And I think time will tell whether he will stand by those decisions or the pressure will be too high.
Yes, that's what I worry, why I don't think it's possible, is that right now he might have negotiated this with Iran, a way to get the Strait of Hormuz open. But Israel, and no, it's not just Israel, Asmongold's also, when they'll see what the deal entails, they'll be... You already saw it a few weeks ago when Asmongold said, if we attacked Iran and Iran's regime stays in place, then that's a loss for the United States because we did all this and we didn't get it regime change. Once he finds out that it's not only we attacked Iran, we didn't get regime change, but now they're getting the assets unfrozen. Now they have control of the Strait of Hormuz. Now we're negotiating from a position of weakness with regard to the nuclear material. It's going to be like, this is even worse than I thought. This war is a disaster. Yeah, he's going to. So that reaction is going to put a lot of pressure on Trump. The 74% of Americans who believe we've won the war, when they see what we've worked out for this ceasefire, will they still be able to pretend we've won? And what kind of pressure will that put on Trump he'll have huge amount of pressure, not only from that side, but Israel, the lobby, military industrial complex, everything to try to get more from Iran and to not have a deal that looks like complete loss for the United States. And that might torpedo whatever he's worked out.
You know, the only thing with your analysis there that I would quibble with is when you said it would be bad for Israel. It would be bad for Benjamin Netanyahu. It would be good for Israel.
Agreed. Netanyahu is not necessarily Israel, but it'd be devastating for Netanyahu.
True.
Because then they're not going to catch any more missiles in the teeth. They're not going to have their desalinization plants hit, or God forbid, anything else like some of these nuclear plants. God, I don't know what Iran might.
It would be bad for the Zionist extremists in Israel, like Netanyahu. They'd be big losers if this goes through.
Do if they got hit, if their energy got hit. Israel wouldn't have to have any of that. Now they've got a lot of demons to have to deal with and a lot of skeletons.
Exactly. They won't have the same impunity though doing what they're doing in Syria, Lebanon, and Palestine. That's where the limitations will be. They won't be the hegemony. They were aiming for hegemony in the region. That's what they were aiming for. That's what Netanyahu was talking about.
Yeah. Israel has taken over. Let's see, Israel right here. This is Israel. This is Syria over here. This here is the area of Syria that Israel has just gone in and taken over. And you see these lines here? That's because there's a part that Israel takes, and there's the new area that Israel's taking. It's an ongoing process. It's taking more and more territory, and it's also trying to it's taken over this area right here in Lebanon. It wants to take over all this, but it's only taken over this so far. It's not going well because Hezbollah is using FPV drones to great effect in Lebanon. And of course, everyone knows about Gaza and the West Banks and how Israel is constantly building more settlements, taking more land there too. And yes, all that, there will be pressure to end all that.
We're no longer a regional superpower, we're a global superpower. Those dreams are on pause, and now you're in a
Right.
multipolar Middle East multipolar world.
Those dreams are dead long term because they rely on U.S. support. And once the dollar goes into a tailspin, that support will end. It's and so what does Israel do after it's basically earned a lot of bad blood from not only the Gulf states but the entire world? What does it do once it loses U.S. support? And at this point, I think there's a lot of people that if Israel ceased to be as a country, they wouldn't be too sad. And I don't mean the people dying. I just mean Israel didn't exist as a country 100 years ago. It might go back to that, and that the people that currently Israeli move to different countries and stuff, and or become part of some new country here. Whether there'll be a country called Israel in 20, 30 years from now, I do not know.
Yeah, and that's why I say Netanyahu would be the loser, definitely the loser, which needs to
And
happen.
the hoax.
I'm all about that because he's led so many people into death and destruction and screwed up the whole region with his desires. So I'm okay with that happening, but that's good for the country of Israel, for the people, because too many even of them have had to pay the price for his malfeasance. But yeah, so anyway, but other than that, whatever, let's get this over with and then figure out the damage, because a lot of damage has been done. Let's work on the wreckage and get it fixed, but just don't make it worse.
Colonel, I have a question for you. Something I'm still struggling to get a clear understanding of is why the UAE and why to that extent? Now, I understand Iran is pretty pissed off with the UAE. I know the UN, they put out a statement yesterday. First, they denied that they even attacked the UAE.
Well, I will add one thing that I haven't heard any other commentators add, is these vessels that U.S. snuck by, these two supposedly U.S. vessels, do you think the UAE is not involved in that? Is not, I'm sure there's Americans, UAE officials that were big part of this plan to guide ships through the Strait of Hormuz, because UAE is right there on the, it wasn't Oman, because Oman's trying to stay more neutral, but UAE is completely anti-Iran, so, and cooperating with not only the United States, but Israel. So I'm sure United Emirates played a part in getting these ships through. And since they played a part in it, they were retaliated against.
UAE, but obviously, I do think they did attack the UAE. Now, they did criticize the UAE getting closer to Israel and having US and Israeli interests here, and allowing them to build up their military here. We know there's an American base, but Israeli, I think they're talking about the Israeli buildup with the Iron Dome, etc. So that's one reason. And number two is that they see the UAE as their best bet at getting back at the US without attacking the US and forcing the US to escalate. So if they're behind the scenes right now, they're like, all right, what is the best way to show the US that we're ready for war? We're not messing around, but without forcing the US, without falling into.
By the way, that is, I think, smart of Israel to have done. They extended their Iron Dome protection to UAE. Now, if you look at the Israel air defenses of the different types, the Arrow, that's the furthest layer, then the Patriot defense system, then David slings, then Iron Beam and Iron Dome. See the Iron Dome? It's just a small area right here. It's meant for rockets from like Gaza or Lebanon. And it hasn't been used at all with regard to what Iran's been sending against Israel, because Iran is way, way, way far away from Israel. So they're sending rockets of different types, ballistic missiles. And so it's the top three layers, the further out layers that have been depleted, that are really, really, really low in Israel. The Iron Dome level, the short-range rockets, that they still have a big supply. It's useless against Iranian missiles, but against Iranian drones, like the Shahed drones, it is effective. So what they've done is they've given part of their Iron Dome to the UAE, which is under threat from Shahed drones, the type of drones the Iron Dome is effective against, and they have a surplus of in Israel. So it's a smart move strategically to curry favor with United Emirates by giving them air defenses against the Shahed drones that they're suffering from that aren't really a threat for Israel and the one type of air defenses they have a surplus of.
To the escalation trap, where if we sink a US warship or damage a US warship, then the US will have to join the war. And I think their best bet with the limited amount of consequences for them, negative consequences, would be not striking the Gulf, because many Gulf countries are talking with Iran, trying to improve relations with Iran, is striking what they see to be the most hawkish part of the.
That's not all there is to it. Iran's biggest weapon is the closure of Strait of Hormuz here, and preventing oil from the Gulf from leaving because it damages the world economy. Now, there's 20 million barrels of oil that leave this area and flow through the Strait of Hormuz, but some of that has been shifted to the pipelines that go to this port here, the Fujairah port, and then are exported, avoiding the Strait of Hormuz. Saudi Arabia has its own pipeline, but 4 million barrels have been moved continuously through here. So that makes Iran's strategy and its leverage of closing Strait of Hormuz less effective because some oil is still going through. What they did, they attacked that. They attacked this port terminal right here, and then they extended their the place where they attack target ships to include this port. And their goal, the obvious goal, is to stop this oil export through this pipeline, taking another 4 million barrels of oil off the global market, making everything worse for the global economy, increasing their leverage. And so when the United States did this, they decided to retaliate in a way that was the most to their advantage, making their blockade of Hormuz much more effective and stronger by taking more oil off the global market. Also punishing the country that is cooperating with Israel, dropped out of OPEC, is the most anti-Iran out of all the Gulf states. It was the obvious target to go after this terminal here and hurt the UAE.
The Gulf, they have Saudi and the UAE, and obviously they chose the UAE. That's my understanding, but I was pretty surprised. I'm not sure if you were surprised as well at the extent of the attack. Operation Freedom just started. They didn't attack a handful of vessels. They attacked about 5 vessels. Most of them were Emirati owned or in the Emirati ports, and they attacked Fujairah, which is probably the biggest surprise to me.
Yeah,
it shouldn't have been a surprise. This oil has been flowing out of here, bypassing the Strait of Hormuz, and they want to shut that down. They want to put as much pressure on the global economy as possible. It shouldn't have been a surprise at all.
I will admit a little bit of surprise at that as well. But for all the reasons you just mentioned, I mean, it's logical. It's rational. If that's the message you want to send, that's certainly the better way to do it than going directly after the United States. And I think I think it's a lower threshold than going after Saudi Arabia as well.
Iran has been watching for weeks since the war started oil being exported through this port. And shutting that down has been something I'm sure IRGC commanders have wanted to do, especially after ceasefire. They keep on watching this oil be exported from there. So when the United States did a provocation and they were told maybe don't sink a U.S. warship, they said, okay, this is a perfect opportunity to take out Fujairah instead. And that's what I'm convinced happened.
For a number of political reasons and just impression religions in the United States. So many people in the U.S. are always talking about Saudi Arabia, this and that, whatever. They don't talk as much about UAE. So it's a lower valued target, I think, from American perception. But Saudi Arabia would be a bigger one.
Saudi's also a bit more dangerous because Saudi could respond militarily. The UAE can as well, but Saudi, because obviously it's got a much bigger military than the UAE, from what I understand. So that would be a bigger risk maybe for Iran to drag into Saudi. What
thing is, all these countries have a big Shia Muslim population that is already unhappy about the attacks on Iran. If these countries actually participate to try to send ground troops for Iran, for example, you would probably have rebellion and uprising from the Shia populations in Saudi Arabia, the United Emirates, etc. And so the military that they're sending, can you imagine them sending a bulk of their military into Iran, being vulnerable at home, and then you have an uprising of Shias at home? No. The Gulf states need their militaries at home because of this domestic danger. They can't be used as a ground force against Iran.
Well, I don't think. I think Iran knows the UAE, or at least I don't think the UAE will respond unilaterally. A lot of people were saying the UAE should as a form of deterrence, but I think the consequences for the UAE that the entire brand, the entire country was built on that sense of safety and security and tourism, and 90% expats. So the UAE cannot afford a war. Saudi, no country in the Gulf, I think, wants war, but I think Saudi has a higher tolerance for war. It's also a much bigger country, too many targets there, much bigger military, and less dependent on expats as well.
Yeah, I think that same thing. Really, the UAE was, their hands were kind of tied because I'm sure they were really angry, and many people wanted to respond. But I think it's also clear that the Iranian attack was a limited hit, and that if they wanted to, they could have done profoundly more damage. And if there had been a counter strike, then the Iranians would have responded to that as well, probably in a bigger way. So it would have been a losing position for a UAE. So I think that they unfortunately made the right call here. That's why it's important that we find some face saving.
When Iran has the escalation dominance, you do not want to bomb them. And UAE recognized that.
Way to get this deal over with for everybody.
You know how every country has their influences. Those, the America first MAGA. No matter what the US does, we support them. Iran first, Iran all the way, Islamic regime all the way. Whatever the Islamic regime does, we support them. And
funny, I consider myself a America first influencer, and I'm definitely not for this war. I think America first would. There's no way that any outcome from this Iran war will be America first. So. America first is a loose term in current context. Can apply to a lot of people.
Obviously, the UAE has their own supporters, and I remember seeing all the tweets. Someone sent me all these screenshots. I'm not sure if you saw them. Iran will pay. Iran will have a horrible day today. Iran's February 28th will be today. Iran will not be the same tonight. So it's like all these tweets, but obviously just influencers, essentially implying that either the UAE is going to destroy Iran or the US and Israel are going to attack Iran. And everyone was under that impression, especially in the UAE. They're like, oh shit, Iran's going to get destroyed. They crossed the line. I just can imagine how they feel now that they went through and Trump doesn't even mention the UAE. I feel bad for the country, obviously, but from the influencers' perspective, they'd be pissed.
Well, I'll tell you, I did hear from
influencers value credibility very highly. It's their currency. It's how they make their money. It's people listen to them because they believe in them. When they burn their credibility like this and look like a fool, it hurts them.
From one particular fellow who has a good UAE source, they thought that it was coming. They thought it was coming. In fact, specifically tomorrow on 7 May was,
and it could still be, but it could still come in. It could still come in.
Could.
A lot of
that's what some people in UAE.
Yeah, it would be right on brand for Trump to announce this. We have this deal, and if he's announced this deal, that means there's probably some real negotiations going on behind the scene. And right during these real negotiations, he decides to bomb them again. That would be right on brand for Trump. Only attack in the middle of negotiations. Don't attack any time where it might not make America look bad.
UAE expected. They thought that was going to happen, but that was before these two true socials by Trump. So that seems to have at least potentially upset that. You can never take anything Trump says at face value.
Didn't Trump do that right before he bombed Supreme Leader? Say we're on the verge of a deal or something like that, and then he bombed them. Yeah, I think he did that. Yeah, right before February 28th.
Value at all. So it may be a deception operation. All I know.
I have a question for you. Get your thoughts on this. So. As you know, I'm the one that always doesn't want to escalate. I'm always the optimistic person. The war's over. It's been over for me for like 2 months. I've been saying it. So
I've been watching his videos consistently for 2 months, and he has been delusional in that way for 2 months. That this war has been. It's been funny. It's watching him recognize that it's not playing out like he thought.
The optimistic person, and I don't want things to escalate. Now, in this case, I was thinking. From a strategic perspective, do you think the US should have retaliated even in a very limited manner to ensure no escalation, but even something symbolic to at least show the UAE and more importantly, allies around the world that the US is there to support you when needed? Because a lot of people are saying...
Yeah, but it would have been good for maybe US to do that, but I don't think Iran would have gone along with that. Why Iran is basically fed up. Completely any retaliation, anything the United States did, it'd be bombing Fujairah, that port in the UAE again, even harder. So that limited retaliation only works if Iran's on board for it.
Now, that what does it mean to be an American ally? I saw a report that people in the Gulf are starting to question that alliance, because they're like, hey, first, you dragged us into this war and we got a lot of damage because of this war that Trump decided unilaterally, number one. Number two is you decided Project Freedom, Operation Freedom. That led to a response from Iran that attacked one of the allies, that doubled down on the alliance with the US, and the US did not respond, not even symbolically. So do you think there's a risk there? Again, that's without escalation. That's the most important part. The US responding in a way where they know Iran won't escalate. But do you think there is a damage done if...
I will have a look at that afterwards, Proton Snail. It's just middle of video. Yep.
If this is the case and Trump won't respond, even though it's great for the war ending, because me and you think both think he should walk away. Right. But from an optics perspective, to be an American ally, or am I looking at it wrong?
Yeah, I think it's too late for that. I think that's already past tense.
Exactly.
I mean, we've already lost that capability by everything that happened
during the 12-day war last year. Trump, he dropped those huge bunker busters on Iran to destroy the nuclear facilities, whatever. That was choreographed. Trump had talked to the Iranians and said, "Okay, we'll drop that, and then this is over. The war is over. If you don't retaliate, it's the end." And Iran agreed to it. Agreed to let the United States bomb, the mountain where the nuclear material was, and not retaliate after Trump did that. And that was how the 12-day war ended. You need to do what Mario here was suggesting, of some retaliation for optics. You need to have Iran on board like that. Iran to be, okay, we'll let you hit us once and won't retaliate. Iran won't go along with that today.
Happened in the first 60 days, and the best that we could try to respond, and we tried to retaliate, and we tried to protect, and utterly failed. So not taking an action here because it was a limited attack, so it wasn't that big, and if we had gone in even symbolically, there was no guarantee that one strike wouldn't have initiated the Iranian response. So, I mean, it would be foolish to, defend your ally if that's the spark.
Yeah, all of the Gulf states have taken huge amount of damage so far, and the United States has failed to protect them. So what's one more strike at this point?
Unless Iran behind the scenes through some mediator, Iran would agree, all right, we're going to strike this. And you don't respond, then Iran...
Yeah, what happened last year during the 12-day war, but Iran won't go along with that today.
Gives the go-ahead.
We apparently
like the Qatar strike.
We apparently did that in the 2025 deal. About how we, Operation Midnight Hammer, and then their response in Qatar. But I think those aren't going to happen anymore. I don't think that Iran is willing to do a tit for tat. And say, all right,
we killed their supreme leader, their pope. They're not going to play ball like this anymore. And okay, we'll let you hit us once without doing anything. No, that's over.
We'll just go this far. I think they're saying, no, we're calling the shots now. That's how I see it. Now, I don't have any insider info on that one, but I don't think they're going to go down that path anymore, because that helps us, and I don't think they're going to help us.
Why would they help us?
Is another fascinating development is China. So Trump is going to see Xi Jinping next week, I think it is. And Arachi went...
That'll be an interesting trip if Trump goes to China, assuming nothing happens in the Middle East before then, to derail the trip. Trump wanted to go to visit China after having taken out Iran from a victorious position. And that's not how he's going to China this time. He's going in a humiliated position of having basically lost to Iran.
Yesterday, and they put out a statement since, and one of resilience and confidence in how things are going. What is China's position now, and what is China's position once this war ends? Iran Zarachi went to China. He says China sees post-war Iran a stronger, more important power after his meeting with Wang Yi in Beijing. The two sides discussed ending the war, ongoing negotiations, Iran's nuclear program, sanctions, Strait of Hormuz. Arachi says a new era of cooperation between Iran and other countries is ahead. On the Straits, Arachi stressed the necessity of respecting Iran's right without elaborating. So the initial statements by Arachi after visiting Iran is one of overconfidence or confidence.
Jubilance, I'd even say, that it went really well.
Definitely confidence, whether it's overconfidence or not, remains to be seen. But I think that the Chinese at least revealed part of their hand when Scott Bessent tried to sanction Iran some more and had 5 Chinese targets, and the Chinese government said, "Yeah, that ain't happening. We're not going to comply with that.
Yeah.
So forget about it." That was a pretty big change too. In the favor.
That's yes, a signal, definite signal by China saying we're not going along with U.S. sanctions no more, and there's no way to interpret that as not a sign of support for Iran.
Of Iran. So I think that now then here this meeting with Irakshi, I think my view is that China is good with Iran being a player. I mean, they're part of BRICS anyway, and if they have humbled America, that's good for them too. But they also want that straight open. They don't want this dual blockade going on because
they want the oil. What China's okay with what's going on now. They are the country best positioned to deal with a temporary closure of Strait of Hormuz. They have the biggest oil reserves, and they imported a shit ton of oil right before this conflict started. And Iran still has a whole bunch of tankers sitting out on the ocean with oil ready to deliver it to China. So China is all set for like probably next 6 months even in terms of oil. What China absolutely does not want is for this to escalate and for the entire Middle East to go up in flames. And so no oil from here for the next 3 to 5 years. That would be bad for China. That would, because it doesn't have 3 years of oil reserves. So that is what it wants. It's completely fine with the Strait of Hormuz being closed maybe for another 3 months, for example, or 5 months. It's said. It just doesn't want escalation into actual destruction of oil infrastructure. That's what it wants to prevent at all costs.
They had a lot of strategic petroleum reserves that could go for many months, but that is a limited factor, and they want to get that strait back open again too. So I think they would like to see this.
They want the strait open, and the time frame is like probably under 5 months, or I'm guessing, because that's what they have in terms of oil reserves, and it would start to get painful after 5-6 months. So they want strait open in that time frame, and they don't want the oil infrastructure destroyed. And in order to get the strait open within 5-6 months, you need to start negotiations now. Or you need to start moving in that direction, because it's even this latest deal Trump has announced. I don't know if that'll be enough to open the straits. If Iran does what is smart, which is not open the straits until they have a final agreement with the United States, then to hash that out would take several months. And China wants that to get underway.
Resolved quickly, but I think that they're good with it humbling America and knocking us down a notch or two.
Colonel, always a pleasure to have you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mario. See you next time.
See you, man. All right, guys.
That was a very interesting video, and covered a lot of the topics related to Iran that we need to cover, and I think I've said everything I needed to during the video itself. This will be on YouTube. Please like and subscribe. Come watch on Kick or Twitch. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye.